That is me and two of my siblings just before the start of the war.
The Second World War began on September 1st, 1939, 20 years after the end of the First. During World War I, Germany had been defeated by the Allied powers and forced to pay overwhelming reparations, which quickly made Germany fall into an economic depression. Hopeless and desperate for change, Germans allowed one man who promised change, Adolf Hitler, to come to power. Adolf Hitler placed the blame of Germany's problems on the Jewish people, making them scapegoats and hated all over Germany. He swore that they were inferior to Germans and that they had to be eliminated. Throughout World War II, Germany invaded many countries all over Europe. In each country, the Nazi Party demanded that Jews be handed over to them and shipped to concentration camps, where they would either be forced to do labor or else inhumanely and brutally killed. Many Jews fled their native country in order to escape Nazi cruelty, or hid in the homes of non-Jews to protect themselves. This is the story of one man who had to leave everything he knew and loved in order to survive.
How old were you, when the war began?
I was 7 years old. My birthday was May 7th. I was 7 years old. I was born in May 7th, 1933. The war started on May 10th, 1940, 3 days after my birthday.
Oh, wow.
And 2 days after that, on May 12th, is when we took the last train out of Antwerp and went and ended up in southern France. No one really anticipated the war that I know of. Certainly wasn't conscious of it. But before the Germans came, they started softening up the city and they started bombing, and we were there for 2 or 3 days before we left. I saw buildings falling down. I mean, it was happening all around us. That was a pretty frightening time, and I can remember that sort of. And the train ride down south was pretty vicious too, because we were being strafed by airplanes all the time, and the train would stop, and everybody would run out into the fields or run to hide under the car. So basically, the train and other transportation took us to a little village called Le Bousquet d'Or, which was in the province of Hérault. It was a village population about 2,000. And according to Wikipedia, it hasn't changed much in the last few hundred years. So for the first 2 years of the war, we sort of resumed a relatively normal life in that little village. We had some kind of an apartment on top of a hill. I had vague memories of it. And I went to school, and I remember in the mornings walking down a long, long road, probably about a mile long to get to school, maybe more. And so life was very simple. My father was a very religious guy, and had known not very little beyond studying Torah until he got married, and was sort of a mashgiach, and he was a diamond cutter, and here he had to resort to being a wood chopper. I mean, he'd go to the woods and chop trees down for people, and so poverty was, it was really pretty bad. Food was very scarce, and they couldn't afford anything. And I really don't know from what they made a living, because, I have no idea who paid him for cutting wood, or putting trees, or what he was probably clearing woods.
France was invaded by Germany in May 1940. After a battle known as the Fall of France, France was divided into two areas: the occupied zone, which was under German control, and the unoccupied zone, which consisted of the south of France and was ruled by Philippe Pétain, who was extremely anti-Semitic. Immediately following the occupation, Jews from both zones began to be deported to concentration camps.
So the first 2 years were fine. And then the Germans started demanding from the French government to start shipping Jews.
Is that in like 1941?
1940, end of 42, beginning of 43. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details. I mean, they first got all the men to, they told all the men to report to a particular place for a work camp. My father, who was a little paranoid to begin with, decided to jump off the train and not go there. And so he did, and most of the men who went to that little camp, which was supposed to be a work camp, ended up being transshipped over to Germany, and very few of them came back. A couple of weeks later, all the women and children were told to leave, and so I ended up in this camp with my mother, my sister, my brother wasn't part of it. I get very confused. My brother had been sent to a summer camp run by a convent, okay? And, but it was just my sister and I, my mother, my uncle, one of my uncles. There was a nurse, a French nurse, who was actually written up in the New York Times about 2 years ago when she died, she was not Jewish, she was Polish, but she had made it her mission to save Jewish children. She got my sister and I out of the camp, crawling under barbed wire, and there are a lot of dark periods at that time which I don't remember. I've never been able to reconstruct them. And I really don't understand how that happened, but the whole family at one point was back together in this little village, in the same apartment. My parents were panicked that we weren't going to last there for very long, so they ended up making arrangements to have me and my sister placed on a farm, each in separate farms. She was at a place called Saint-Jean-du-Gard, about 12 miles away from where I was. But so we only saw each other once. And again, a little funny story. My sister is 2 years younger than I. When she got to her farm, she refused to eat, mostly because she would not eat pork. She was kosher. I didn't have such compunctions. So one day, in desperation, the woman who hid her brought her to our farm by bicycle, because there was no gasoline. Even if you had a car, you couldn't drive it anywhere. So there she comes with my sister sitting behind her and holding on to her, my baby sister, and she says, "You have to tell her that she should eat." So I said, "Esther, eat." She said, "Okay." So they went back and she ate. So that was the only time I saw my sister in 2.5 years. The first few months that I got on the farm, they would send me to Sunday school. And I studied the catechism, like a good little Christian Huguenot boy. But once the Vichy government started getting a little nastier, they began to worry a lot, and they pulled me out of school because they felt at some point I would blab, I would say the wrong thing, and hiding a Jewish child was punishable by death. So for the next 2 years, I really spent alone. Never saw another child. I used to get up when it was still dark. I would have a little cup of coffee. I was 9 years old. A little cup of strong coffee. I would go up with a bunch of my sheep and my goats and a couple of dogs, and I would sit by a tree and read a book. and watch my flock. At 8 o'clock in the morning, Hélène Fabaron would come up to me with a bowl of café au lait, which is coffee with milk, but more milk than coffee, and with like old bread broken into it, so that was like a cereal. I would eat that, and she would come back again around noontime and bring me some sausage and bread, and I had other chores. I wasn't there all day because I had other chores. They taught me how to hunt for rabbits, and we had lots of wonderful rabbits there. And I would make these little lassos out of wire, and set them along the paths, and the rabbits would get caught. And my job would be also to go down and collect any rabbits that were caught. And then I learned to even dress a rabbit. Do you know what that means?
To like you prepare
basically peel off the skin, you open them up, you clean them out. I learned to do that, and I learned to love eating rabbits. And there were a number of adventures, many adventures, scary adventures while I lived on that farm. Especially as the war got towards the end, many French people collaborated with the Germans. They were called collaborateurs. And some of them were eager to help the Germans because they would get benefits from doing that. So as isolated as we were, once in a while somebody would show up. They might show up by bicycle, they might show up even in a car. And whenever somebody showed up, Monsieur Fabaron would be very worried and very scared. And there was an actual incident where a woman that was suspected of being a collaborator was asked to stay overnight. And so he had a little cabin, which we saw when we were visiting. And he said, you could stay there overnight. And that was one of the weirder moments. And when he put it up there, and he came back, and he says to me, Hubert, we can't let that woman live because she definitely suspects something. And so he went into his wine cellar with me. He said, let me alone. He lifted up a board in the floor and took out a revolver that he had used when he fought in the Franco-Prussian War in 1890 something. Okay, and he said we waited till night fell, and then he said, we're going to go there. I'm taking you so you can warn me if she runs out the other way. But you have to understand, we're going to kill her. And make a long story short, she had escaped. She had run away. She wasn't there anymore. She was caught by someone in the next village and ended up being hung. Many collaborators were hung. Every French village had these trees. They're called platanes, and I have no idea what the English equivalent is. And that surrounded every village square. And apparently after the war, many of these villages had collaborators hanging from those trees. It was very swift judgment. By the way, the farm that I lived on for 2.5 years didn't have electricity. It was not, that area was not electrified at that time. So it was very different, very primitive in many ways.
Did your sister have like a similar thing where it was very isolated?
A little different, not sure quite why. The woman she stayed with, her name was Odette Hofbauer. She was an Alsatian, sort of. Her husband had been a soldier, and had been captured, so she was alone on that farm. She really adored Rita, Esther, my sister. I mean, she almost felt like she was a daughter, okay? We all lost touch with those people. But my sister went back there probably about 20 years ago with her husband. They were traveling in France. They came to this little village and said, let's call up and find out if she's still alive. So they telephoned. They looked at the telephone book. Sure enough, Papa was there. So they telephoned her before cell phones. And they went there, and Odette she was in a state, she was so hysterical with joy. They put her up, sleep in the same room she had slept in when she was during the war. Nothing had been changed for the 40 years.
Wow.
Nothing. She hadn't moved anything. Her husband never came back, by the way. But more than that, she had spent years writing to every Jewish agency she could think of to find out what happened to Esther. She never got any answer because she was looking. She was sending to French agencies, and by that time we were in the United States. We emigrated pretty quickly after the war. So my sister and her husband slept in that room. When they came down in the morning, the kitchen, big farm kitchen, was filled with people, old people. The butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, they were all there because they all had been in touch with Esther when she lived there. So it was different, and the village was different. I'm not sure. Now, interesting case in point that René Fabaron was not particularly fond of Jews. And he made that clear to me. But the goddamn Germans were not going to tell him how to run their country. And he was willing to risk his life for that. And that was true of many French. But the French, what's interesting is we always talk about Holland, Anne Frank and Holland, all that. Very few Jews survived in Holland. And yet it was a big Jewish community. And 75% of French Jews survived. So even though the French are by nature what we call xenophobes. I mean, if you're not from their village, they hate you. So the fact that they didn't like Jews, they don't like anybody, The Parisians have nothing but contempt for the people from Marseille and vice versa. So the anti-Semitism was not this kind of virulent anti-Semitism you found in other parts of Europe, like Lithuania and Latvia and Poland and Hungary and Romania. It was very different quality. I mean, a lot of French people risked their lives to save Jews. But one day the war was over. My Aunt Frida, we had a young aunt. She was only a few years older than I. She was a beautiful woman, a young woman. Spoke perfect French, so she was able to move around, and she wasn't even scared to go into Gestapo headquarters and talk to them. They would always, everybody. Anyhow, she was a very brave woman. And she came to get me at the end of the war, and she brought me to a place in Aix-les-Bains which was on the border of Switzerland. It's a little town. A young rabbi by the name of Henri Soil, S-O-I-L, had decided to try to create a home for children that had been hidden and basically bring them back to Jewishness and Zionism and so on. So there were about 30 children there, my sister and I, and another 28 or so. And we learned everything from the beginning, singing the blessings in the morning, and also a lot of scouting type of stuff. We go hiking on the mountains of the Alps, actually, singing songs, which to this day my sister and I sing when we get together. And yeah, it turned 30 little kids into Jews again. And then one day my father shows up, and the Swiss had not been ready to release the Jews. The Jews that went over to Switzerland, were put in a camp also. They weren't mistreated there, but they were in a camp. And they wouldn't let them out, even though the war was over. My father says, the hell with that. He basically ran off and recrossed the Alps and came to get us. So.
What happened to your mom?
Mom, that was fine. My mother was saved from being transshipped when they were loading the trucks, and my mother got on the truck. My uncle, he was the oldest uncle, and oldest brother, said, you can't take her, she's a pregnant woman, so take me instead. So he went, ended up in Auschwitz. She survived it, and she ended up, in fact, being pregnant. I just heard a story yesterday, of all days, talking to one of my sisters who heard this story, or read a story about, there was a rumor going around that the French would not deport Jewish pregnant women. And so a lot of people who never would, in their dream would have wanted to get pregnant during World War II, in the middle of this madness, women got pregnant deliberately in the hope that they wouldn't be sent off. This was never discussed in my family, except that my sister said she remembered my father calling my little baby sister, who was born in France, his angel, his guardian angel. And in retrospect, after reading that article, she realized that's what happened. They got pregnant deliberately, and my sister was born anyhow. I had two uncles, two brothers of my mother, ended up in Auschwitz. The older brother, the one who took her place. And the younger brother, Albert, who was really only 4 years older than I, 5 years older, 6 years older. After the war, he came back. He came back like a little skeleton. And he was a wonderful guy. He had a great sense of humor. Anyhow, he made a good life for himself. He became a very successful diamond dealer. Married, had 3 children. He used to come to the United States quite often because he was buying big lots of diamonds from the federal government. So he was very active here. And he would stay with us all the time. We became very good friends. And then one day, when he was back in Antwerp, Belgium, in his office, a guy walked into his office who was the brother of a man he had been dealing with, Palestinian. And the guy shot him dead. This is after having gone to Auschwitz. The guy was arrested, but the Belgians, being who they are, they gave him 2 years in jail. We had been told that the older uncle, the one that took my mother's place, had survived Auschwitz and that he died during the death marches. Have you heard about the death marches at the end of the war? As the Germans were retreating and the Allies were advancing, the Germans would empty out the camps and made the Jews, run along the road, basically retreating, and anybody that fell, they would shoot. It was well known that many books have been written about the death marches. About 3 years ago, Arnold's wife is alive and well, wonderful lady, lives in Israel. She has 3 children, and we know all of them. One of them lives in White Plains, actually. She heard a story that really shook her up. She said, Moshe did not die on the death marches. He actually was freed by the Allies, called his mother and said, I'm coming home. Somebody entrusted him with carrying some valuables back because he had a reputation for being an incredibly honorable guy. And he was killed on the train going back to Belgium because it was a robbery. Couldn't corroborate that story, but his wife, my aunt, was pretty shaken up by this. That's only about 3 years ago. Look, Europe was devastated by World War II. What is remarkable about human beings is that they return to normal life at the slightest chance. People tried to lead normal lives even in concentration camps to the extent that they could. People played music, people sang songs, people wrote poetry, people wrote books, people, starving, dying. As long as there's life, Jews seem to be, look, it's true of people in general, but I mean, I speak for the Jewish people certainly, recovered very quickly in terms of getting back to a normal life.